Ah yes, Sonic R, the second and last Sonic game to be developed by Traveler's Tales, until I guess LEGO Dimensions. This would also be the only actual Sonic game to be released on Saturn that wasn't a minigame or a compilation containing a 3D overworld. Production of Sonic R initially began as a Formula 1 racing game, until Sega asked Traveler's Tales to restart the game as a Sonic racing title. By that point, it was February 1997, and Sega wanted to get the game released in November 1997. Yes, Sonic R's entire development lasted only 9 months. For a Sega Saturn game, especially one trying to be fully 3D, that's insane. Who the hell could manage something like this? John Burden, that's who, and the rest of his crew. With the experience of 3D Blast under his belt, John worked tooth and nail to figure out how the logistics of the Saturn hardware worked. So much so that when Sonic R was officially revealed at E3 1997, just 4 fucking months after the game began development, gaming journalists at the time were impressed by how Sonic R didn't have any pop-in issues, which a lot of the more noteworthy 3D Saturn games had. Instead, the graphics would fade in as you get closer to the environments. This effect was not easy to pull off. And of course, John Burden does have a few videos on GameHut talking about how he made Sonic R, so go check those out, along with the rest of his Sonic content. Though Traveler's Tales were not the only ones working on the game, since key members of Sonic Team would be in charge of the map designs, to which John Burden and his crew would later convert them into full levels. And despite a very rushed development, Sonic R managed to get released in November 1997, to very mixed reviews. In light of other racing titles like Mario Kart 64 and Diddy Kong Racing, I'm guessing Sonic R just really wasn't up to snuff back then. I never actually got to play this game on Saturn until a few years ago. Like most people, I first got to play Sonic R through the Sonic Gems collection on GameCube, which released in 2005. And this version was mostly based on the PC version that originally released in 1998. I'll be looking at the original Saturn version of the game first, and then address the later 2 ports afterward. Believe it or not, even though it's a simple racing game, Sonic R apparently does have a story to it. Taken from the Encyclopedia itself, Sonic and Tails are drawn to the World Grand Prix when they learn that Dr. Eggman is involved. However, they soon find out that the whole race is a ruse to keep Sonic distracted, while the Doctor hunts for the Chaos Emeralds. Knuckles, never one to pass up a chance to compete against Sonic, joins as well. Amy, ever the enamored fangirl, chases Sonic to the starting line. There's no story mode or anything like that, but I always like it when racing games like Sonic R have these little plot summaries. Okay, so diving into the game itself, obviously it's a racing game, but instead of using vehicles, almost every character is racing on foot. You start off with 4 characters, but there are 5 unlockable ones. Well, technically 6, but I'll get to that later. First is Sonic, who's the most standard racer you can start out as. He has a double jump and can spin dash when standing still, so it's mainly usable when you're about to start a race. And one big gameplay thing, like a lot of the other characters, Sonic can't run on water, so he'll instantly sink whenever he touches it, which also decreases his speed by a bit. Here's an interesting piece of trivia. During E3, John Burden noticed that people would give up on playing Sonic R once the characters got submerged underwater. This was apparently because the characters moved a lot slower underwater in earlier builds. So in the final game, John Burden decided to increase the underwater movement speed. What a kind sport. Okay, the next character is Tails, who has the ability to fly for a short while, though his turning is pretty sluggish. Then there's Knuckles, who has the ability to glide, which you can seriously utilize to find shortcuts and whatnot. It's a lot of fun. The next character is Amy Rose, who's driving a full-blown car, which can be really slow and it turns like ass. She also can't jump, which sucks. And though her car can travel on water, it somehow moves even slower. Another fun fact, Amy was initially gonna have a buzzsaw attack, which John Burton showed off in an early build of Sonic R. Shame it got cut, ironically. Next are the unlockable characters. There's Dr. Eggman, who I think can be debated as the best character in the game. Like, he's alright, but has probably the best turning, and he can hover above water without any issue. It's pretty sick. Weirdly enough, Eggman is the only unlockable character who's not silhouetted, but the rest of the unlockable characters are seemingly more secret. To unlock the silhouette characters, you gotta collect 5 coins that are hidden in the levels, which can be pretty tricky to find, so I'd probably recommend using a guide. Afterwards, beat the race without getting in last place, and then simply beat the character in a race to unlock them. The second unlockable character is Metal Sonic. Of course. He's just about the same as Sonic, just without the spin dash, but he is able to stay above water for longer. You can even jump on the water so you don't sink. It's pretty cool. There's also a Metal Knuckles, who is the coolest fucking character ever, and he's only in Sonic R. Why? He's got the raddest design ever, along with being a much better Knuckles, and he has the most broken glide move I've ever seen. Metal Knuckles is such an epic character. I wish he was used in more games. Wait, did I skip someone? Oh yeah, Tails Doll, the creepypasta punchline, and probably the worst character in the game. If not, he's at least in the top 2. A much worse version of Tails who's slower, and has really abysmal turning. He can hover over water, but apart from that feature, Tails Doll just sucks. But honestly, I really can't tell if I would consider Tails Doll or Egg Robo to be the worst. Egg Robo is the last unlockable character, and it's almost like they saved the worst for last. He's almost the exact same as Eggman, but that also means he can't jump at all. Plus, he can't even float above water, which doesn't really make sense considering he's wearing a jetpack. I never ever play as Egg Robo. He's just awful. Alright, so while that's the end of the unlockable characters, there technically is one more character to mention, but I'll get to it later. How about the actual game? Well, aside from Amy and Eggman, all the characters are moving on their feet. You can either hold up to move forward, or just hold down B. I usually just use B. But one of the most common complaints with Sonic R is how the turning can be complete dog shit. The actual turning itself really depends on the character, but I'd heavily recommend using the left and right triggers to make sharper turns. I mean, it's still not perfect, but it's something. I don't think the game has a tutorial mode or anything like that. So if you didn't know how to make sharp turns in this game, now you know. Again, it seriously depends on which character you choose, which could also change your experience in the levels. One of the biggest points made against this game is that there's only 5 racetracks. 4 available at the start, and just 1 that you can unlock later. While I understand and do agree with the criticism about how there's only 5 racetracks, I think with the added context that this game was only being worked on for 9 months, it really does explain why we have such few racing arenas here. The racetracks are Resort Island, Radical City, Regal Ruin, Reactive Factory, and the unlockable Radiant Emerald. Haha, all the levels start with R. I see what you guys did there. To summarize, these levels are pretty decent? I guess I'll just go down the list. Resort Island is a great starting zone. I love the little shortcuts you can come across. The music also greatly complements the feel of the level too. Yeah, let's address the elephant in the room. You see, every level in Sonic R has a vocal theme, all composed by Richard Jacques, who previously composed 3D Blast on Saturn, and the songs feature vocals by TJ Davis. So why do all the levels have vocal themes? Well, apparently, when Richard met Yuji Naka to discuss which direction to go in for Sonic R's soundtrack, he eventually showed him the theme song, Supersonic Racing. Once Yuji Naka listened to it, he loved it so much that he pretty much demanded that TJ Davis be featured in all the songs in the game. So that's why the soundtrack is what it is. So Resort Island has Can You Feel the Sunshine, Radical City has Living in the City, Regal Ruin has Back in Time, no, not the Huey Lewis song from Back to the Future, Reactive Factory has Work It Out, and Radiant Emerald has Diamond in the Sky. Sonic R's soundtrack is pretty notorious for how split it can be between fans. People either absolutely love the soundtrack, or they absolutely hate it. probably because a reviewer from 10 years ago called it bad or something. For me, I absolutely adore Sonic R's soundtrack, even though I recognize that it's not really for everyone. Also, yes, it really doesn't fit for a racing game, but I just can't help but love this soundtrack. I think it's super catchy, memorable, and just has a sweet personality to it. And TJ Davis is a beautiful singer. So if you hate this soundtrack, then I hate you. Though for any of you killjoys out there, you can turn off TJ Davis's vocals in the options menu. But why would you want to do that? Go outside and touch some grass for a change. John Burton was actually the one who requested that the instrumentals be included because he was pretty unsure if people would have liked hearing vocal themes in a Sonic game. Even though I've said 1,000 times at this point that I love this soundtrack, John Burton actually did have a solid point. Especially considering that at the time, this was like the third big Sonic game to include vocal songs in them. Hoo boy, we really had no clue what was coming next. Also, since Sonic R's music works as Redbook audio files on the game disc, that means you can listen to the soundtrack on any CD player, along with being able to rip the soundtrack yourself. It's pretty sick how the CD basically acts as its own soundtrack release, though there was a separate official soundtrack released in 1998. It included 2 neat remixes that you can't hear anywhere else, but it also excluded the instrumental tracks for some reason. And interestingly enough, the digital version of the soundtrack includes the instrumentals, but removes the 2 remixes from the 98 release. Weird. There was also this Work It Out single released in 1999. It includes 4 DJ remixes of Work It Out, so I guess this record was meant to be played in clubs and whatnot. These remixes have never been officially released elsewhere, so I got the vinyl for myself and decided to record and upload them to my second channel to preserve. I recommend giving this record a listen. It's pretty fascinating, and it even misspells Richard Jock's first name as Wretched. So take that, dick. That's what you get for throwing that stupid hissy fit on Twitter over T-Whoop's mediocre remix. Anyways, back to Sonic R the game. The second level is Radical City. It's pretty tight. It's also a mess, layout-wise. I really like the pinball section, as brief as it is. It's a pretty nice callback to Casino Night. I'd recommend using Metal Sonic to utilize a funny shortcut in this level that I don't think John Burton could have foreseen. Breaking this game can be hilarious. In fact, back in 2014, I accidentally clipped out of the level into the empty overworld. Yeah, I was outside the level. I uploaded a clip of it happening to my second YouTube channel, and I have no clue how I managed to do this. Also, yes, I'm playing as Supersonic in this footage. I was gonna try to save him for later as a secret, but I fucking blew it! Level 3 is Regal Ruin. I like how the wall carvings have a bunch of Chaos Emeralds on them. It feels very lore heavy. Actually, Ian Flynn, the main writer of the Sonic comics and the later to be released Sonic Frontiers, once shared that Sega of Japan made it a point to inform him while writing the comics that Sonic R is canon? Like, it's actually part of the main series canon. So all these emerald carvings, echidna statues and shit, in some insane way, they're all somehow connected with the mystic ruins in Sonic Adventure. Crazy ass continuity. Next is Reactive Factory. Like the previous levels, there's plenty to explore, but it's also just an overall mess for a racetrack. Just looking at the level maps in the bottom right give you a general idea about how cluttered they can be. Hell, the AI for the other racers can sometimes get confused on which way they should go. The level also feels weirdly unfinished. Not that all the levels are unpolished, but that becomes the case mostly in Reactive Factory. This probably has to do with the rushed development, but there are portions of Reactive Factory where some graphics are just floating in the air. It can look a bit rough. Alright, the last level is Radiant Emerald, which you can unlock by getting first place in the previous races, and it's pretty much the Rainbow Road clone. Though I do really like how transparent the floor looks on Saturn, which is a graphical effect that the later ports sadly get rid of. It's a fine level with decent shortcuts. The only real issue I have with this level is, this is where the game ends? Well, kind of. Ignoring that I spoiled this earlier, there are actual Chaos Emeralds that you can go after. Yeah, Resort Island has 1, then the next 3 levels have 2 each. Yeah, Radiant Emerald doesn't have any emeralds, ironically. You can find the Chaos Emeralds in hidden areas, mainly behind doors that need either 20 or 50 rings. Not only that, once you get the Chaos Emeralds, you have to finish in first place. Otherwise, you don't get the emerald as punishment. Eat shit, JonTron. There's no good or bad endings or anything like that, but you do get the best reward that this game could possibly give you. Supersonic! Yep, Supersonic is unlockable and he's super overpowered. He's the fastest, he has great turning, and he could stay above water for as long as he wants. Supersonic's inclusion in this game would mark the last time he would be playable in regular levels for 13 years. It took Sonic 4 Episode 1 of all games to finally bring him back. Jesus. And a really cool detail with Supersonic, if you race in Radiant Emerald as any other character, you'll hear Diamond in the Sky. But if you race there as Supersonic, you'll hear Supersonic Racing, which is a really cool detail. Okay, while Supersonic is great and all, this does lead to a pretty big issue. Before you unlock Supersonic, when you play as the extra characters, you race against the other unlockable characters, plus Sonic taking the 5th character slot. It's already pretty unfair because Sonic is better than the other characters, but once you get Supersonic unlocked, that means the unlockable characters are forced to race against freaking Supersonic. It's absolutely no contest. Not to mention, once you unlock Supersonic, there's no real reason to play as anyone else. Usually whenever I do go back to play Sonic R, I just do a quick playthrough as Supersonic. There are other modes to be found in Time Attack, like Balloons and Tag, but I rarely ever go back to these modes. There is a multiplayer mode. On the Saturn version, it's just 2-player split screen, since the Saturn only had 2 controller ports. However, if you're gonna do a multiplayer Sonic R session, stick to the Gems Collection version. While this version is based more on the PC port, instead of just 2 players, it actually has the ability to do 4-player. Yes, 4-player Sonic R, and it's only on the Gems Collection port. That is insane! I heavily recommend trying this out if you ever get the opportunity. It's a lot of fun. But going back to the Saturn version real quick, there's not much else to really discuss. Sonic R really doesn't have a lot of content to it, which is one of its biggest downfalls. It's a fun, short racing title with a great soundtrack, but it really isn't much in terms of content. I guess one last thing to mention before talking about the ports is how you can mess around with the R on the title screen. Like, you can rotate it and mess with the colors by using the face buttons. So if you want to call this game Sonic B, you can. It's cute. So in 1998, Sonic R got a PC port, which was a pretty solid port of the game. Obviously, it had to render the graphics differently, but one major extra that this port added was weather effects. This can change the look of every level, including a winter season that actually freezes the water, meaning you can now run on it. It's super cool. This weather option was actually planned to be on the original Saturn version, but it had to be cut likely due to time constraints, so the PC port restored it. You also probably notice that it's in widescreen. This is mainly because Sonic R has a relatively decent modding community, so fans have provided neat upgrades for the game. There's even a mod that recreates the original Sega Saturn lighting. Playing Sonic R in widescreen at a perfect frame rate is honestly kinda cathartic for me. It looks great. And of course, this wasn't the only time Sonic R got ported. I brought it up a few times already, but the 2005 Gems Collection port of Sonic R is very likely the most famous version of the game out there. It includes all the same features as the PC version, along with having that awesome 4-player mode that I mentioned earlier. I'd probably recommend the version of Sonic R on Gems Collection the most. Though, if you want to mod the game and play it in full HD, then definitely get the PC version. I'd actually really love to see Sonic R get ported again. Like, imagine seeing an official HD version of Sonic R with online multiplayer. I'd actually really like to see the concept of Sonic R tackled again, with a much upgraded character roster, more levels, online play, but with most of every character running on foot again but with tighter controls. I think that'd be a lot of fun. Maybe a Sonic R2 could happen at some point. And even though this was just a kart racer, I did really like how the logo for Team Sonic Racing really emphasized the R in racing. It was a cute callback. When you really think about it, Sonic R actually marked the end of a pretty big era for Sonic. Like, just 1 year after this game, we got Sonic Adventure, which heavily changed both the look and direction of the series, with R being the only real original Sonic game to be released on the Sega Saturn. This could technically be seen as the last true classic Sonic game. It's pretty sad. This would be the last time Sonic would be pudgy, have the shorter spines, and black pupils. At least until Generations brought him back, for better or worse. I guess until we see each other again, sayonara for now, my dear friend.